Rain streaked across the floor-to-ceiling windows of Henry Lawson's penthouse office, blurring the glittering skyline into smudges of gold and silver. It was nearly midnight, and the city below pulsed with life, but Henry's world was silent, ordered and still. His desk was immaculate, except for one leather-bound folder spread open in front of him. On the cover, embossed in discreet gold lettering, were the words Air Project. Inside lay a meticulously drafted legal contract payment. Terms, medical arrangements, confidentiality clauses, everything required to turn biology into a business transaction. He read it again, not because he doubted its details, but because this was too important to leave to chance. Henry was a man who had built empires from nothing, a reclusive tech tycoon worth more than he could spend in 3 lifetimes. He could buy companies in a phone call, bend markets with a single decision, but there was one thing his fortune could not purchase: a blood heir. Love, marriage, family. He had tried them once and discarded them like failed prototypes. Love was weakness. Emotions were liabilities. But a child, his child, was legacy. Legacy was control. Sliding the contract back into the folder, Henry shut off the desk lamp and took the private elevator down to his waiting car. Outside, the city's air was thick with rain and neon. He instructed his driver to take the long route home, a habit when his mind needed space to sharpen. As they rolled through the slick streets, something caught his attention at the corner of an almost empty block. A young woman sat cross-legged under the awning of a shuttered bookstore, bent over a sheet of paper balanced on her knees. Her hair was damp, a loose mess of chestnut strands, framing a face too pale for the cold. She wore a coat that had long since stopped keeping out the weather, and yet her movements were steady, deliberate. She wasn't begging. She wasn't scanning the street for coins. She was drawing. Henry told the driver to pull over. He lowered the tinted window. "You," he called, his voice deep and commanding. The woman looked up, cautious blue eyes meeting his. "What?" she asked, her voice guarded. "Come here." She hesitated, gaze flicking to the black sedan, then back to her sketch. "I'm not asking twice," Henry said, the edge in his tone leaving no room for debate. Reluctantly, she stood and approached. Up close, she was thinner than he'd thought. Her hands red from the cold, the paper she carried smudged with graphite. "What do you want?" she asked. "Dinner," he replied. "My treat." Her eyes narrowed. "Why?" "Because I have a proposition, and I prefer to talk over a table, not in the rain." 15 minutes later, they were seated in the corner booth of a quiet cafe. Steam rose from the mugs between them. "My name is Henry Lawson," he began. "I'll be direct. I want you to have my child." She froze, mug halfway to her lips, before setting it down with a sharp clink. Then she laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "That's the worst pickup line I've ever heard." "It's not a line," Henry said evenly. "It's a contract. You carry the pregnancy, no emotional involvement, no future contact. I cover every expense, and upon delivery, you receive enough money to start your life over anywhere you choose." She stared at him, trying to decide if he was insane or dangerous. "You're serious?" He reached into his jacket, pulled out his phone, and turned the screen toward her. It displayed an active banking app, the kind only accessible by the truly wealthy. One tap and a 7-figure sum was queued for transfer. Clara's smile faltered. She looked from the screen to his unreadable face. "Think about it," Henry said, sliding a business card across the table. "You have 24 hours. When?" He left. The rain was still falling, and Clara sat motionless, staring at the numbers she could hardly believe were real. Asterisk, asterisk. Clara didn't sleep that night. She sat upright on the narrow cot in the shelter, the thin blanket wrapped tight around her, staring at the flickering light above. Around her, The sounds of restless breathing and coughing filled the dim room, but her mind was far from the cold concrete walls. Henry Lawson's voice kept replaying in her head, his words precise, deliberate, like every syllable was calculated for impact. She told herself she should laugh it off, that no sane person agreed to something like this. But the image of that bank transfer kept pushing through her resolve, wrapping itself around the deepest part of her fear, the fear of never escaping this life. The shelter manager's announcement during breakfast didn't help. "Funding's been cut," she said, wringing her hands. "We'll be closing by the end of the month. I'm sorry." The sentence landed like a physical blow. Clara stared at the stale toast on her plate, thinking of nights in the freezing air, of scavenging for food again, of being invisible to everyone who passed her on the street. That afternoon, she found herself pacing the block near the cafe where she'd met Henry. She wasn't ready to call him, not yet. But part of her wanted to see if the sleek black sedan would appear, if his intense gaze would find her again. It didn't. She walked away, furious at herself for caring that by evening. The hunger in her stomach matched the gnawing unease in her mind. She pulled Henry's business card from her pocket and ran her thumb over the embossed letters. The decision weighed heavier with every passing hour. She finally muttered, "Screw it," and used the shelter's payphone to dial his number. Picked up on the first ring. Clara. He said her name like he'd been expecting her all day. "I'll send a car. 20 minutes. The sedan glided up to the curb, exactly on time. Inside, Henry's assistant Rachel, impeccably dressed, and calm greeted her with a polite but watchful smile. "Mr. Lawson is waiting," she said, her tone revealing nothing. When they arrived at his private legal suite, Henry was already standing at the head of a long glass table. A thick folder sat before him, flanked by 2 pens. "Sit," he said. Gesturing to the chair opposite, his doc Rachel poured Clara a glass of water before slipping quietly out of the room. Leaving them alone, Henry opened the folder, revealing the contract. "Read it carefully. Every term is clear. Full medical supervision, private accommodations, all living expenses covered. Upon delivery, you walk away with the agreed sum. No claims, no contact." Clara skimmed the pages, her heart pounding. It was all there in black and white, signed already on his side. Her hands trembled as she flipped through, the legal jargon pressing down on her like a weight. Her eyes stopped on one clause: termination of emotional relationship with child, immediately upon delivery. "That's cold," she said, glancing up at him. Henry didn't flinch. "It's necessary." "Necessary for you," she shot back. His jaw tightened, but he didn't rise to her challenge. Instead, he slid a tablet across the table, the screen showing a secured escrow account with her name on it, currently holding an advance payment large, enough to change her life before the birth even happened. "This is waiting," he said. "You sign. It's released within the hour." For a long moment, Clara stared at the screen. It was surreal, sitting in this sterile glass room, the faint hum of the city far below, with her future reduced to a transaction. Rachel returned silently, placing a pen beside Clara's hand. "Your choice," Henry said softly now, no command in his tone. "But you have to decide tonight." Clara looked at the pen, then at him. There was something unreadable in his eyes' control. Yes, but beneath it, a flicker of something else. She couldn't name. "Something that made her uneasy." She signed. Henry took the papers, glanced at them once, and closed the folder with finality. "Welcome to your new life," he said, as if sealing a deal worth billions. Rachel led her out, but before they reached the door, she leaned in close and whispered, "Be careful. He's not telling you everything." Clara froze, but Rachel was already walking ahead, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. That night, when the car turned into a long driveway flanked by wrought iron gates, Clara saw the mansion for the first time, its marble facade glowing under the floodlights. Like a palace. The gates closed behind them with a sound that was almost a warning. Inside, she was shown to a suite bigger than any apartment she'd ever lived in. The bed was massive, the air scented with something delicate and expensive. And yet, as the door closed, Clara felt the walls inch closer. She was comfortable, safe, and warm. But she wasn't free, and somewhere in the quiet of that vast house, Henry Lawson was reading her file. Not just the contract, but a second folder, one Rachel hadn't let her see its contents marked confidential in bold red letters. The first days in the mansion passed like a strange dream. Clara woke to sunlight spilling through silk curtains, breakfast trays set on polished silver, and the low murmur of staff moving through the halls. It was a life she had only seen in glossy magazine photos left behind in bus station waiting rooms. And yet, she couldn't relax. Comfort this perfect felt dangerous, as if it came with a price far higher than the one she'd signed for. Henry was absent most of the time. When he did appear, it was in brief, carefully measured encounters, a question about her meals, a reminder of the upcoming medical checkup, a comment about the weather, delivered without warmth or humor. He was polite but distant, a man who had built walls so high that even his words had to climb them before reaching anyone. Rachel, his assistant, was the only person who spoke to Clara in anything resembling a normal tone. She explained the schedule, made sure Clara had what she needed, and handled the logistics of every doctor's appointment. Still, Clara noticed something in the way Rachel's eyes followed her, a mixture of caution and curiosity, like she was watching a chess piece that had just entered the board. One afternoon, Clara wandered into the back garden, needing air. The hedges were trimmed to precise angles, flowers arranged in perfect symmetry, a reflection of the man who owned them. She sat on a marble bench and pulled out her sketchpad. For the first time since arriving, she began to draw not the mansion, but the people inside it. A fragment of Henry's face from memory, the sharp line of his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed when he was thinking. She didn't hear him approach until his shadow stretched across her page. "You draw," he said, his tone not quite a question. Clara closed the sketchbook instinctively. "Sometimes? May I see?" "No." She met his gaze evenly. Something flickered in his eyes, not anger, but curiosity. He didn't press. Instead, the next morning, she found a package waiting outside her suite, a box of high-end art supplies, the kind she'd never have been able to afford. A card rested on top, in Henry's neat handwriting. "For when you feel like creating something worth keeping." It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even a compliment, but it was something. A week later, Rachel drove her to the clinic for her first official appointment. Henry was waiting there, a surprise in itself. He sat beside her in the examination room, his suit impeccable, his expression unreadable. The doctor applied the cool gel to Clara's stomach and pressed the wand into place. Then it came a soft, steady rhythm filling the room. The baby's heartbeat. Clara's chest tightened. She gripped the edge of the table, willing herself not to cry. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Henry's posture change. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze fixed on the monitor. For a fraction of a second, the control on his face slipped, replaced by something almost tender. Neither of them spoke on the ride back. But that night, Clara woke to the sound of faint footsteps outside her door. She waited, breath held, until they faded away. The next day, curiosity got the better of her. She explored deeper into the mansion's west wing, a part she hadn't seen before. At the end of a quiet corridor, she found a door ajar. Inside, Henry sat at a desk, the only light coming from a lamp angled over a silver photo frame. His shoulders were tense, his hand gripping the frame like it might disappear. She stepped in without thinking. "Who's that?" Henry turned sharply, slipping the frame face down. "No one you need to know. You keep a photo of no one?" she asked, tilting her head. His jaw tightened. "Some things stay private." She didn't push, but the image stayed with her, the way his voice had dropped, the way his hand lingered over the hidden picture, like it was a wound he refused to uncover. That night, she sketched from memory again. Not Henry's jawline this time, but the way he'd looked at that photograph. Rachel brought her tea the following morning, her eyes drifting to the unfinished sketch on the desk. "Careful," she murmured, setting the cup down. "You're starting to see the cracks. He doesn't like that." Clara glanced up. "And what happens when you see the cracks?" Rachel hesitated, then gave a thin smile. "You learn what's on the other side. Just make sure you're ready for it." Later that week, Henry appeared at her door unannounced. "Walk with me," he said. They strolled through the garden in silence until he finally asked, "Do you think you'll keep drawing?" "I might," Clara said. "Depends if I have something worth keeping." His eyes lingered on her for a moment before he looked away. "Everything worth keeping has a cost." The words hung in the air, heavy and strange, and Clara had the sudden, unshakable feeling that he wasn't talking about her art at all. Asterisk, asterisk. The morning of her second ultrasound began like any other calm on the surface, but with a hum of tension beneath. Clara had grown used to the routines of the mansion, to the quiet meals, the pristine halls, the feeling of being watched without anyone in sight. She had learned Henry's patterns too, when he disappeared into meetings, when his study door stayed locked, when he avoided her eyes a little too carefully after the doctor visits. Rachel drove her to the clinic again, but this time Henry was already there, standing by the reception desk in a tailored charcoal suit. He greeted Clara with a short nod, his expression unreadable, but something in his posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back, made her think he was bracing himself. The doctor wasted no time. Clara lay back, the cold gel spread over her stomach, and the familiar hum of the machine filled the small room. Henry stood close, his eyes fixed on the screen, his reflection caught in the glossy surface of the monitor. Then the sound came, not one rhythm, but two. "Well, that's a surprise," the doctor said with a small smile. "You're carrying twins." Clara blinked, sure she'd misheard. "Twins?" "Two strong heartbeats, both healthy," the doctor confirmed, pointing to the faint shapes on the screen. For a moment, the room felt smaller. Clara's chest tightened, her mind racing through the practicalities, twice the responsibility, twice the separation when the time came. She turned her head just enough to see Henry's face. His mask had cracked. His eyes were locked on the monitor, unblinking, as if trying to memorize every pixel. A faint breath escaped him. Not quite a sigh, not quite a gasp. The ride back to the mansion was thick with silence, but it wasn't the cold, dismissive kind. It was heavy with something Clara couldn't name. She kept stealing glances at him, and each time she found him staring ahead, jaw tight, his mind clearly far away. That night, she found herself wandering to the nursery Rachel had shown her. Weeks ago, a single crib, pale walls, and shelves lined with untouched toys. It was perfect, sterile, and lifeless all at once. She wondered if Henry would make another room now, and next morning she had her answer. Work crews were already inside, removing furniture, measuring the walls, discussing color schemes. 2 cribs were on order. Henry passed through briefly, giving instructions without glancing at Clara, but as he turned to leave, he paused. "I'll need you to approve the final setup," he said, voice low. It was a strange thing to ask, considering their arrangement. "Why me?" "You're the one carrying them," he replied simply, and walked away before she could respond. Over the next few days, his presence around the house became more frequent. He still kept his distance, but he asked questions now about her health, her appetite, what foods she craved. When she mentioned a specific kind of fruit she hadn't tasted since she was a child, it appeared in the kitchen the next morning, imported fresh. Rachel noticed too. One evening, while they sat in the garden, she said quietly, "He's different. I've worked for him for 8 years. He doesn't notice things like cravings." Clara gave a small, uneasy smile. "Maybe twins change things." Rachel's eyes narrowed slightly. "Or maybe you do." A week later, Clara found herself restless after dinner. She wandered to the west wing and stopped outside Henry's study. The door was ajar again. Inside, he was on the phone, speaking in a tone she had never heard from him before, soft, almost uncertain. "I didn't expect to," he was saying. "It changes things." A pause. "No, I don't regret it. He cut himself off, noticing her shadow in the doorway. "I'll call you back." He set the phone down and looked at her, the unreadable expression back in place. "Couldn't sleep?" "I was just walking," she said carefully. His gaze lingered, as if deciding whether to say more, but then he gestured toward the door. "Get some rest. You'll need it." Clara turned to leave, but as she did, she caught sight of the silver frame on his desk again, still face down, as always. And this time, she had the sharp, unshakable feeling that whatever picture it held was tied to the way he had looked at the ultrasound screen, and to why the news of twins had unsettled him more than he would admit. The storm rolled in just after dusk, rattling the tall windows of the mansion and casting quicksilver shadows across the marble floors. Clara sat in the lounge with a blanket over her knees, sketching the outlines of 2 tiny cribs she'd seen, delivered that morning. The sound of the rain was oddly soothing, until a sharp pain twisted low in her stomach. She froze, waiting for it to pass, but it came again, harder. Her pencil rolled from her fingers to the floor. A third wave of pain made her gasp, gripping the arm of the chair. Rachel appeared in the doorway a moment later, eyes sharp. "Clara? You look." She stopped when she saw Clara's pale face and the way her hands clutched her belly. "Is it time?" I don't know," Clara whispered, her breath uneven. But another contraction left no doubt. Rachel didn't hesitate. She pressed a button on the wall intercom. "Mr. Lawson, it's happening." Footsteps thundered down the hall, faster than Clara thought possible. Henry appeared, his suit jacket half on, his tie askew, something she had never seen before. He crossed to her in 3 strides. "Car's ready," he said, his voice steady but edged with urgency. "You're going to be fine." Outside, the wind tore at them as Henry helped her into the black sedan. He climbed in beside her, ignoring Rachel's offer to sit up front. The driver sped through the rain-slick streets while Henry gripped Clara's hand. His grip was firm, anchoring. "Breathe through it," he said. "We're almost there." Clara wanted to ask why he was here, why he wasn't sending her with Rachel, like he always did, but the pain made it impossible to speak. The hospital's emergency team was waiting when they arrived. Clara was whisked into a delivery room, the bright lights glaring down. A nurse tried to guide Henry toward the waiting area, but he shook his head. "I'm staying," he said flatly, and his tone left no room for argument. Hours blurred into a haze of pain and noise. Through it all, Henry was their cool cloth against her forehead, steady words in her ear, his hand never leaving hers. She caught glimpses of him watching her, his usually sharp eyes softened with something unfamiliar. Then, through the chaos, came the cry. High and piercing, small yet commanding. "It's a boy," the doctor announced, holding up a tiny, squirming bundle before passing him to the nurse. Clara barely had time to see the boy's dark hair before another wave of pain overtook her. Minutes later, a second cry split the air, this one higher, lighter. "And a girl," the doctor said with a smile. Henry stepped closer, his face pale as he looked between the two newborns. For a long moment, he didn't speak. He seemed stunned, as though he'd been struck by something he hadn't planned for, hadn't calculated. The nurse brought the boy to Clara first. She cradled him against her chest, her tears falling freely now. His skin was warm, his tiny fingers curling. Instinctively, she looked up at Henry and found him watching. UNMOVING. When they placed the girl in his arms, something in him shifted. His head bent slightly, eyes fixed on her face. His lips parted, but no words came out. Clara thought she saw the faintest tremor in his hands as he held the baby closer, like she was something fragile that might disappear. She was too exhausted to ask what was wrong, but she saw it the way he stared, almost afraid, as if this tiny life had unlocked a door inside him he'd sworn shut forever. Hours later, the twins were in the nursery under observation, and Clara was resting in her hospital bed. She woke briefly to find Henry still there, sitting beside the incubators, the storm outside replaced by a hush that made the moment feel suspended in time. Rachel came in quietly, a coffee in hand. She looked at Henry and tilted her head. "You all right?" He didn't look away from the babies. "For the first time in a long while, I think I am." But when Rachel left, his gaze lingered on the girl, and the shadow in his eyes deepened, as though she reminded him of someone, or something he had never told Clara about. ***. The next morning, the hospital room was washed in pale gold from the winter sun. Clara stirred awake, expecting the quiet presence of nurses or the muffled cries of her newborns. Instead, she found Henry standing by the window, his back to her, shoulders squared, as if he'd been rooted there for hours. "You've been here all night?" she asked, her voice still hoarse from exhaustion. He turned slowly. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes looked heavier somehow, like he'd been carrying more than the weight of the sleepless night. "I needed to make sure everything was in order." It wasn't the answer she expected, but before she could ask more, he walked to her bedside and handed her the boy, swaddled tight and warm. She held him close, the bond she'd been fighting to keep at a distance, now impossible to deny. Henry remained standing. "Clara, there's something I should tell you." The way he said it made her pulse quicken. She thought of Rachel's warnings, of the confidential folder she'd never seen, of the way he'd stared at the baby girl last night as though she was a ghost. "I wasn't always alone," he began, his gaze fixed on the far wall. "Before the company became what it is now, before all of this," he gestured vaguely, meaning the wealth, the mansion, the precision of his current life, "I was engaged. Her name was Isabel." Clara felt the room tighten around them. "She was everything I told myself I didn't need," Henry continued quietly. "But I couldn't stay away. We planned to marry. She was pregnant. And then—" his voice faltered for the first time since she'd met him. "An accident. I lost them both." Clara's chest ached at the rawness beneath his usually controlled tone. She thought she understood now why he wanted an heir so badly, why adoption wasn't enough for him. But then he looked directly at her, and the shadows in his eyes deepened. "The girl, the one born last night, she has Isabel's face. Not as a woman, as a child." "Exactly." Clara's breath caught. "That's impossible." "I thought so too," Henry said. "But when I looked at her, I knew. It wasn't just resemblance. It was like seeing someone I thought I'd never see again. And it terrified me." He sank into the chair beside her bed, pressing his palms together. "I told myself this arrangement was about control, about making something on my terms, but now I don't know what this is anymore." Clara didn't know what to say. The contract had always been the line between them clear, sharp, and unyielding. Now that line felt blurred, unstable. Rachel stepped in then, carrying a folder. She hesitated at the tension in the room before setting it on the table. "It's the postnatal care documents," she said evenly, but her eyes flickered toward Clara for just a second too long. When Rachel left, Henry didn't reach for the folder. Instead, he stood, running a hand over the back of his neck. "Clara, I've been hiding behind agreements and signatures because it's easier than trusting people. But I'm telling you this now because I don't want to hide anymore." Her grip tightened around the baby in her arms. "And what happens when it's time to give them up? When the contract says I walk away?" Henry looked at her for a long moment, and for the first time, there was no calculation in his gaze, only uncertainty. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I do know that whatever I thought I wanted before, it's not enough anymore." That night, when Clara finally slept, she dreamed of the silver frame on Henry's desk, the one that was always face down, and of the girl in the photograph stepping out of it, holding the newborn and smiling, in a way that made her chest ache. She woke with the strange conviction that the photograph and the baby girl's uncanny resemblance were connected to something Henry still hadn't told her. The days after the twins' birth moved in a strange rhythm-soft lullabies from the hospital nursery. The shuffle of nurses' shoes, the hum of the heating system cutting through the winter chill. Yet beneath it all was a tension that made every moment feel like it was balancing on a knife's edge. Clara felt it in the way Henry lingered longer than necessary in the nursery, his eyes constantly drawn to the baby girl, as if afraid she might vanish if he looked away. On the morning she was scheduled to be discharged, Clara dressed slowly, her movements heavy with something she didn't want to name. The contract's shadow hung over her, as real as the paper. It was written on. Rachel came in carrying a small suitcase and set it on the chair. "Car's ready," she said, her tone professional. But Clara caught the flicker of sympathy in her gaze. Henry arrived moments later, holding the contract. In his hand, the sight of it made Clara's stomach knot. "So this is it," she said quietly. For a moment, he didn't move. Then, without a word, he tore the contract down the middle. The rip was loud in the stillness of the room. He tore it again and again, until the pieces were nothing more than shreds on the floor. Clara stared at him. "What are you doing?" "I'm ending this the way I should have started it," Henry said. "No contracts, no terms. Just us, if you want that." Her throat tightened. "Why? You could have had everything you wanted without me." "I thought I wanted control," he said, stepping closer. "But then you walked into my life, and I realized control is nothing compared to connection. And when I saw them, our children, something shifted. I don't want an heir anymore, Clara. I want a family. With you." She shook her head slightly, her eyes glistening. "You can say that now, but what about when things get difficult? When I make mistakes? When they do? Then we deal with it," Henry said without hesitation. "We fight through it. I'm not looking for perfection. I'm looking for real. And you're the only real thing I've had in years." The words cut through her fear like sunlight breaking storm clouds. Slowly, she nodded. Henry's expression softened for the first time that morning. "There's one more thing you should know." He motioned to Rachel, who stepped forward with another folder thicker than the contract had been. Clara opened it and found documents, photographs, and a page with a name circled in red. Her breath caught when she read it. Isabelle Moreau. She was my fiancée, Henry said. "And these?" He pointed to the older documents. "These are genealogy records from my investigator. I had him run a background check on you when we signed the agreement. I wasn't looking for this, but I found it anyway. Clara, you're distantly related to Isabelle. A cousin, generations apart." The room seemed to tilt. "So the twins. They're The bridge between two bloodlines that were never supposed to meet again, Henry said quietly. That's why our daughter looks like her. It's not just coincidence, it's family. Clara's hands trembled as she held the file. The resemblance. She had noticed in Henry's eyes, the way he had looked at the baby girl, it all made sense now. The universe had tangled their lives together in ways no contract could have orchestrated. She looked up at him, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Then maybe it wasn't your control that brought us here. Maybe it was fate. Henry reached for her hand. Then let's not waste it. They left the hospital together, the twins bundled in their arms, stepping into a world that felt terrifyingly uncertain, but completely theirs. Weeks later, in the mansion's garden, the winter. Frost had begun to melt. Clara sat on a blanket with the twins playing beside her, sketching the scene in her lap. Two cribs in the sunlight, Henry crouched between them, and her own figure beside him. She titled it The First Day of the Rest of Our Lives. When Henry joined. Her leaning over to kiss her temple, Clara didn't think about contracts or money or the cold loneliness of her past. She thought only about the warmth of his hand on hers, the laughter of their children, and the unshakable truth that whatever had brought them together, business, loss, fate, it had turned into something real.